The summer of 1993 brought nothing but heartbreak to Eleanor Blackwood. At just 19, she watched as they lowered her father's body into the ground. Cooper Blackwood, oil tycoon to the public, ruthless crime boss behind closed doors. Before the soil had settled on his grave, Ellie's aunt delivered the crushing news. To save the family from ruin, she would marry Garrett Wolcott, head of the rival crime syndicate they'd been fighting for decades. The man they called the Shadow. They shipped her to Santa Fe like cargo, a peace offering wrapped in white lace. She expected cruelty from this stranger, this enemy. What she didn't expect was the small silver box he placed in her hands on their wedding night. "Don't open it," he told her, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Not until your heart understands what's inside." As gunfire and betrayal ripped through their world, that mysterious gift would become her salvation. And when she finally lifted its lid in her darkest hour, what she discovered didn't just change her fate, it silenced every whisper, every doubt, every threat in Dallas and Santa Fe. This is the story of a bride sold for peace, who found her power in the most unexpected place. The heart of her enemy. The glass towers of Dallas shimmered like mirages in the July heat, indifferent to the grief-consuming Eleanor Blackwood. The cemetery's manicured lawns were dotted with black suits and designer dresses, faces hidden behind dark sunglasses. Some were crying for her father. Most were calculating what his absence meant for their interests. Ellie stood motionless as the priest's words dissolved into the humid air. Cooper Blackwood, dead at 49. Heart attack, they said. Though Ellie knew better. Nobody who crossed the Redding Syndicate died from natural causes. "Hold yourself together," Aunt Catherine whispered, her manicured nails digging into Ellie's arm. "Everyone's watching." Of course they were watching. The Blackwood princess, sole heir to an empire built on crude oil above ground and blood money below. She'd learned the family business sitting on her father's knee, the legitimate operations and the other kind. The kind that kept their name out of police reports but whispered in back rooms across Texas. The mourners filed past with practiced condolences. Men who called her father boss kissed her cheeks with tears in their eyes. Men who feared him studied her with cold calculation, already seeing weakness. "Miss Blackwood," a deep voice rumbled. Agent Williams stood before her, FBI badge tucked discreetly in her pocket. "My sincere condolences." "Thank you for coming, Agent," Ellie replied, her voice steady despite the veiled threat of the woman's presence. "My father always appreciated your professional courtesy." Williams's mouth tightened. They both knew what that meant, the payments, the information traded, the delicate dance between law enforcement and the Blackwood operation. A dance that might end with Cooper gone. 3 days after the funeral, Aunt Kit summoned Ellie to her father's study. Nothing had been moved, the leather chair still held the imprint of Cooper's frame. The air still carried traces of his cologne. Kit sat behind the desk like she'd always belonged there, fingers steepled beneath her sharp chin. "The organization is vulnerable," Kit said without preamble. "Marshal Redding is moving on our territory. 3 of our distributors have already flipped. The Wolcott Syndicate is watching from Santa Fe, waiting to pick at our bones." Ellie swallowed hard. "Dad had contingencies." "Yes," Kit nodded, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. "And you're it." "What are you talking about?" Kit slid a manila folder across the polished desk. Inside was a photograph of a man Ellie had only seen in newspaper clippings. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes so pale they seemed to cut through the paper. Garrett Wolcott, 34 years old, head of the Wolcott crime family that controlled everything from Albuquerque to the Colorado border. "No," Ellie breathed, understanding washing over her like ice water. "It's already arranged," Kit said, voice softening with something like pity. "Your father made the deal before he died. You marry Wolcott, our organizations merge, and the Blackwood name survives. Otherwise, we're done. Redding will wipe us out within months." "You can't sell me like I'm part of the inventory," Ellie hissed, hands shaking. "Can't I?" Kit's voice hardened. "You think your art history degree prepared you to run this operation? You think these men will follow a 19-year-old girl?" She leaned forward. "Your father protected you, Ellie. He kept you half in, half out of this life. That protection died with him." Ellie stared at the photograph, at the man who would own her. "And if I refuse?" Kit smiled thinly. "Then I hope you've saved enough from your trust fund to disappear, because everyone connected to the Blackwood name will be dead by Christmas." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "The wedding is in 2 weeks. In Santa Fe, his territory." That night, Ellie stood at the window of her penthouse, watching the city lights blur through her tears. On her bed lay an open suitcase. She could run, she had passports, accounts her father had set up. places no one could find her. But running meant abandoning the people who'd served her family for generations. People who would be the first casualties in a war with Redding. Her phone rang, displaying a number she didn't recognize. "Hello?" she answered warily. "Eleanor Blackwood?" The voice was deep, with a hint of gravel, a voice accustomed to being obeyed. Her spine straightened instinctively. "Yes, Garrett Wolcott. I believe we have an arrangement to discuss." The private jet cut through clouds like a silver blade, carrying Ellie toward a future she'd never chosen. Below, the Texas plains gave way to New Mexico mesas, red earth rising like ancient gods from the desert floor. She pressed her forehead to the cool window, willing her heart to harden like the landscape beneath her. "We'll be landing in 20 minutes, Miss Blackwood," the pilot announced over the intercom. One of Wolcott's men, not her father's. Everything around her now belonged to him. Kit sat across from her, reviewing contracts on her tablet. "Remember what we discussed?" she said without looking up. "Be respectful. Observe before you speak. The Wolcotts run things differently than we do." "You mean they don't pretend to be legitimate business people?" Ellie said coldly. Kit's lips thinned. "I mean they have traditions, old ways. Garrett Wolcott may operate in the modern world, but his organization is built on foundations laid 3 generations ago. The Santa Fe airport was small, private, no terminal, just a sleek hangar where 3 black SUVs waited on the tarmac. As the stairs descended, Ellie spotted him immediately. Garrett Wolcott stood apart from his men, taller than in his photographs, dressed in an impeccable charcoal suit that somehow looked at home against the desert backdrop. His hair was dark, swept back from a face more handsome than she'd expected, but it was his eyes that stopped her cold, pale blue, almost silver in the harsh sunlight, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He didn't smile as she approached, merely inclined his head slightly. "Miss Blackwood, Mr. Wolcott." She met his gaze steadily, refusing to show fear. Something like approval flickered across his face. "Welcome to New Mexico." He gestured toward the waiting cars. "You must be tired after your journey." The drive took them through Santa Fe's historic plaza, past adobe buildings, the color of sunset, then up into the foothills where houses grew sparse and land stretched untamed. They turned onto a private road that wound through pinyon pines, ending at iron gates emblazoned with a stylized wolf's head. Hacienda Sangre sprawled across the hillside, a massive adobe structure with curved archways and weathered wooden beams. It looked ancient, like it had grown naturally from the earth itself. "My family has lived here for 4 generations, Garrett said quietly as they stepped into a courtyard filled with blooming desert flowers. "Since before New Mexico was a state. It's beautiful," Ellie admitted, despite herself. He studied her face. "Not what you expected from criminals?" She met his gaze. "I grew up in a penthouse with Picassos on the walls. I know beauty can coexist with violence." A corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile. "We have that in common, at least." Inside, the hacienda was a blend of old-world luxury and southwestern simplicity. Staff moved efficiently through the rooms, unpacking Ellie's things, preparing dinner. In the great room, an older man sat in a carved wooden chair that resembled a throne. His white hair contrasted sharply with his tanned skin, his posture still powerful despite his age. "Sullivan Hayes," Garrett introduced him. "My advisor. My father's before him." Hayes studied Ellie with shrewd eyes. "Cooper Blackwood's daughter," he said, his voice a rumble. "You have his look about you." "Thank you," Ellie said, unsure if it was a compliment. "The wedding will be tomorrow at sunset," Hayes continued. "Our people and yours. A union of houses, as it should be." Ellie's stomach clenched. So soon. She'd hoped for time, for a chance to understand this place, these people, to find an escape. A young man entered, his resemblance to Garrett unmistakable. Though his features were sharper, his movements more restless. He scowled when he saw her. "My brother, Colton," Garrett said, a warning note in his voice. Colt gave a mock bow. "The sacrifice arrives. How nice." "Colt," Garrett's voice dropped dangerously low. "What? We're all thinking it." Colt circled Ellie, appraising her. "You really think a Dallas princess is going to be happy here? That she won't run back to Daddy's towers first chance she gets?" He laughed bitterly. "Oh wait, Daddy's dead." Ellie's hand cracked across his face before she could think. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. Colt's eyes widened, then narrowed with dangerous heat. But before he could move, Garrett stepped between them. "She has spine," Garrett said quietly. "Good. She'll need it." He turned to Ellie. "My brother forgets his manners. He'll remember them tomorrow. That evening, Ellie sat alone on the balcony of her suite, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Tomorrow she would marry this stranger, bind her life to his. To survive, her aunt had said. But sitting here, surrounded by unfamiliar beauty and familiar danger, Ellie wondered what survival really meant. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. When she opened the door, a young woman stood there, arms filled with white fabric. "Your dress," she said, "for tomorrow." "I'm Isabella. Garrett asked me to help you prepare." Isabella laid the gown on the bed, simple, elegant, nothing like the princess confection Ellie had imagined they'd force her into. "It was his mother's," Isabella explained. "Tradition. Does everything here run on tradition?" Ellie asked. Isabella's smile was small but genuine. "The old ways keep us strong." She hesitated. "He's not what you think, you know." "And what do I think? That he's a monster?" Isabella touched the dress gently. "My cousin is many things. Dangerous, yes. Hard when he needs to be. But not a monster." After Isabella left, Ellie tried to sleep, but dreams of her father kept her tossing in the unfamiliar bed. Near dawn, she slipped out onto the balcony again, watching as the first light touched the desert. "You should rest," Garrett's voice came from below. He stood in the courtyard, dressed casually in jeans and a simple shirt, looking more human than he had the day before. "So should you," she called back softly. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. "I never sleep before important days." He hesitated. "Will you walk with me? There's something I want to show you before tonight." Curiosity won out over caution. 10 minutes later, they were walking a narrow path that wound behind the house, up into the foothills. Neither spoke until they reached a small plateau overlooking the valley below. "My grandfather brought my grandmother here the morning after their wedding," Garrett said, "and his father before him." "Another tradition?" Ellie asked. "The most important one." He turned to face her fully. "I know this isn't what you wanted, Eleanor. I know you see me as the enemy. Aren't you?" she challenged. "Today I'm the man who will be your husband. Tomorrow, we'll see what tomorrow brings." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a silver box, ornately carved with turquoise inlay, small enough to fit in her palm. "What's this?" she asked, taking it hesitantly. "A wedding gift, from me to you." His eyes held hers. "Don't open it. Not yet. Not until your heart understands what's inside." "How will I know when that is?" The smile that touched his lips didn't reach his eyes. "Trust me, you'll know." The wedding dress hung like a ghost in the corner of Ellie's room. Ivory silk, simple lines, touched with age but still elegant. A dress meant for love, not politics. She traced the delicate beadwork with trembling fingers, wondering about the woman who'd worn it before her. Had Garrett's mother been a willing bride, or another pawn sacrificed for family interests? The silver box sat on her nightstand, untouched since he'd given it to her. What strange game was he playing? In Dallas, gifts came with obvious strings attached. Clear expectations. Nothing was ever just given. Isabella arrived with 2 other women to help her prepare. They worked in near silence, weaving tiny white flowers into Ellie's dark hair, applying makeup that enhanced rather than transformed. When they finally stepped back, Ellie hardly recognized the woman in the mirror, regal, composed, a desert bride with secrets in her eyes. "It's time," Isabella said softly. The ceremony took place in the hacienda's private chapel, a small adobe structure with stained glass windows that scattered jewel-toned light across whitewashed walls. Aunt Kit stood rigid beside Ellie, playing mother of the bride with cold efficiency. Faces from Dallas, her father's lieutenants, business partners, corrupt officials filled one side of the chapel. The other held Garrett's people, hard-faced men in expensive suits, women with calculating eyes, all watching her march toward their leader. Garrett waited at the altar, imposing in a black suit, his pale eyes never leaving her face. Beside him, Colt fidgeted, a purple bruise still visible on his jaw, someone's punishment for his behavior the day before. The words washed over Ellie like distant waves. "Dearly beloved, 2 families united, until death do us part." She spoke when prompted, her voice hollow in her own ears, aware of the guns hidden beneath tailored jackets, of deals being sealed with every vow. Garrett slid a ring onto her finger, platinum set with diamonds and turquoise, its weight unfamiliar and binding. When the priest instructed him to kiss his bride, he brushed his lips against hers with surprising gentleness, his hand briefly cupping her cheek. "Breathe," he whispered against her ear. "It's almost over." The reception spilled into the hacienda's courtyard, lanterns hanging from ancient trees, tables groaning with food and drink. Music drifted through the evening air, a strange blend of classical and southwestern that somehow worked. Ellie moved through it all like a sleepwalker, accepting congratulations, memorizing names and faces, noting which of her father's men were already cozying up to their new boss. "Dance with your husband," Kit instructed, materializing beside her. "Everyone's watching." Garrett appeared as if summoned, extending his hand. "Mrs. Wolcott," he said, the name strange and foreign to Ellie's ears. He led her to the center of the stone patio where other couples moved aside, creating a circle around them. His hand settled at her waist, warm through the silk of her dress, his other hand taking hers with surprising care. "You're trembling," he observed quietly as they began to move. "I'm dancing with a stranger I just married," she replied. "Forgive me for being nervous." Something like amusement touched his eyes. "We're not strangers, Eleanor. We're partners now. Business partners," she clarified. "For now." He guided her through a turn, his movements fluid for such a powerful man. "Your father spoke of you often during our negotiations." Ellie tensed. "What did he say?" "That you were smarter than anyone gave you credit for. That you understood both sides of the business. That you'd fight this arrangement with everything you had." His lips quirked. He was right about all of it. "He sold me to you," she said bitterly. Garrett's expression hardened. "He protected you the only way he could. Marshall Redding would have taken you as a trophy after he killed everyone you love. At least with me." He stopped himself. "At least with you, what?" "At least with me. You have a choice." Before she could ask what he meant, Sullivan Hayes approached, ending their private conversation. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of faces and forced smiles. Ellie watched Garrett move through the crowd, noting how people responded to him with respect rather than fear. She realized with surprise, unlike her father's organization, where terror had been the currency of control. Near midnight, Colt cornered her near the bar, his eyes glazed from too much whiskey. "Welcome to the family, sister," he drawled. "Hope you enjoy your wedding night." Ellie stood her ground. "I'm sure I'll manage. He may act civilized, but my brother's still a Wolcott." Colt leaned closer, his breath hot on her neck. "We take what we want." "That's enough, Colt." Garrett's voice cut through the tension. He didn't raise it, didn't need to. The authority was bone deep. Colt straightened, sullen but obedient. "Just welcoming my new sister." "Go sleep it off." Garrett's tone left no room for argument. After Colt skulked away, Garrett turned to Ellie. "I apologize for my brother." "Is he right?" Ellie asked bluntly. "About tonight?" Understanding dawned in Garrett's eyes. "No," he said simply. "That's not why you're here." Later, when guests had departed and the hacienda grew quiet, Ellie sat on the edge of the massive bed in what was now their shared suite, still wearing her wedding dress. The door opened and Garrett entered, his tie loosened, jacket gone. "You should know," he said without preamble, "that this marriage is about alliance, not ownership. Your room is through there." He nodded toward a connecting door. "You're free to use it whenever you wish." Ellie stared at him, caught off guard by his directness. "Then why the ceremony? Why all of this?" "Because appearances matter in our world." He removed his cufflinks, placing them on a dresser. "And because a marriage can be dissolved. A merger cannot." He crossed to a cabinet and poured 2 drinks, offering one to her. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. Ellie took a careful sip, studying him over the rim. "You're not what I expected. Neither are you." His smile was brief but genuine. "Get some rest, Eleanor. Tomorrow, we start building something new." As he turned toward his own room, Ellie called out, "The box! When am I supposed to open it?" Garrett paused, his back to her. "When you're ready to see the truth." 3 weeks into her marriage, Ellie still felt like an outsider at Hacienda Sangre, but she was learning the rhythm of the house, the hierarchy of the organization, the unspoken codes that governed Garrett's world. She'd expected to be a prisoner, but instead found herself included in meetings, consulted on decisions, especially those involving her father's, now her husband's, Dallas operations. "Your insights on the Murphy contract were valuable," Garrett told her one evening as they reviewed documents in his study. "You spotted weaknesses I missed. Dad always said I had an eye for detail." Ellie reached for another file, her wedding ring catching the light. "The port access clause needs reworking, though. It leaves us exposed." She didn't miss the slight smile that touched Garrett's lips at her use of us. She hadn't intended it. The word had slipped out naturally, betraying how quickly she was adapting to this strange new reality. Their days fell into a pattern. Breakfast on the terrace, business until afternoon, then separate pursuits until dinner, which they always shared, often with Sullivan Hayes or other lieutenants, discussing operations with a frankness that surprised Ellie. Her father had compartmentalized everything, keeping his people in the dark. Garrett operated differently, transparency within the inner circle, absolute discretion beyond it. Their nights remained separate, true to Garrett's word. Sometimes she heard him working late, his voice a low murmur through the connecting door as he made calls to associates across the country. Other nights, silence, and she wondered if he was alone, not that it should matter to her. One morning, Isabella invited her to the gallery in town, the legitimate business that laundered much of the Wolcott money. "You need to be seen," she explained. "The community should know Garrett's wife." Santa Fe's plaza bustled with tourists admiring native artwork, musicians playing beneath portal walkways, the scent of roasting chilies filling the air. The gallery occupied a prime corner location, its windows displaying stunning contemporary paintings with eye-watering price tags. "Garrett has quite the eye," Isabella said as they walked through the exhibition rooms. Most of these artists were unknowns when he started collecting them. "He doesn't seem the artistic type," Ellie observed, studying a particularly striking canvas. Isabella laughed. "There's a lot you don't know about my cousin." They were examining a sculpture when the gallery door chimed. Ellie turned to see Agent Williams entering, her FBI badge discreetly tucked away, but her purpose obvious in her stance. "Mrs. Wolcott," Williams greeted her with professional coolness. "Settling into married life?" Ellie felt Isabella tense beside her. "Agent Williams, shopping for art today? Just admiring the local color." Williams glanced around the gallery with deliberate interest. "Quite a change from Dallas for you. Change can be refreshing." "Indeed." Williams moved closer, lowering her voice. "I wonder what your father would think of this refreshing change. His only daughter married to his biggest competitor within weeks of his death." "My father arranged the marriage," Ellie said evenly. "You might want to update your intelligence." Something flickered in Williams' eyes, surprise, quickly masked. "Is that what they told you?" Before Ellie could respond, the gallery phone rang. Isabella answered, her expression shifting as she listened. "We need to go," she said to Ellie, hanging up. Now, outside, Colt waited in a black SUV, his usual swagger replaced by tense urgency. "Redding's men hit our warehouse in Albuquerque," he said as they climbed in. 3 of our people dead. The hacienda was in controlled chaos when they arrived, men moving with purpose, phones ringing, weapons being distributed. Garrett stood at the center, issuing orders with quiet authority. When he saw Ellie, relief briefly softened his features. "Are you all right?" he asked, crossing to her. "I'm fine." Williams showed up at the gallery. His jaw tightened. "She's working with Redding. Has been for months. That's why you wanted me back here." It wasn't a question. Yes. No excuses, no sugarcoating. His honesty was refreshing after years of her father's protective lies. That night, after emergency meetings and security briefings, Ellie found Garrett on the terrace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring at the distant mountains. The day's events had stripped away some of his careful control, revealing edges of the man beneath. "How bad is it?" she asked, joining him at the railing. "Bad enough." He didn't look at her. "Redding's making his move sooner than we anticipated. He thinks with your father gone, we're vulnerable during the transition. Are we? Not if we're smart." He finally turned to her. "I need to know I can trust you, Eleanor. Completely." The intensity in his gaze sent a strange shiver through her. "Why wouldn't you? I'm as much a target as you are, because despite everything, you're still a Blackwood. This is still a marriage of convenience." He set down his glass. "And because you keep that box I gave you locked in your dresser drawer, unopened." Ellie's breath caught. "You've been in my room? I know everything that happens in this house." His voice softened. "I don't blame you for your caution, but the coming days will demand trust between us." He was standing close now, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the faint scar above his eyebrow. For weeks they'd maintained careful distance, professional politeness. Now something else crackled in the space between them. "Tell me what's in the box," she said. "I can't." His hand rose, hesitating before brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That's not how this works." The touch was brief, electric. Ellie stepped back, confused by her own response. "Then how does it work, Garrett? Because I'm trying to understand my place here." "Your place is beside me." The words were simple, direct. "As my partner, my equal. Your wife in name only." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of what might have been regret. "For now," he said quietly. "That was our arrangement." Before she could reply, Sullivan Hayes appeared at the terrace door. "They found another body," he reported grimly. "Left at the arroyo." "It's Desmond." Garrett's face hardened. Desmond had been his childhood friend, his most loyal lieutenant. "Get everyone in the war room, now." As he strode past Ellie, his mask firmly back in place, she caught his arm. "I'm coming too." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Good." Later that night, with plans made and forces mobilized, Ellie sat alone in her room, turning the silver box over in her hands. Whatever game Garrett was playing, whatever test this was, she was tired of waiting. With decisive movements, she searched for a latch, a hinge, anything that would open it. Nothing. Frustrated, she set it down harder than intended. The impact must have triggered something because suddenly a small panel slid open in its base. Not the main compartment, but a hidden section she hadn't noticed before. Inside lay a tiny silver key and a folded note in Garrett's handwriting. "The box opens when you're ready to trust not just me but yourself." The key fit nowhere on the silver box. Ellie tried every possible edge and corner, growing increasingly frustrated. Whatever lock this tiny silver key opened, it wasn't the box itself. Another layer to Garrett's puzzle, another test of her patience. She slipped the key onto a chain around her neck, tucking it beneath her blouse, close to her skin. The note she burned in the bathroom sink, watching Garrett's elegant handwriting curl and blacken. Trust not just him, but herself? What did that even mean? Sleep evaded her that night, her mind racing with the day's events. Redding's escalation, Desmond's murder, the strange electricity when Garrett touched her face. By dawn, she'd made a decision. If she was going to survive in this world, her world now, she needed to fully commit. No more standing on the sidelines. Garrett found her in his study at 6 a.m., reviewing files on Redding's operations. "You're up early," he observed, pouring coffee from the sideboard. "Redding's distribution network has vulnerabilities," she said without looking up. 3 key locations with minimal security. Hit them simultaneously, you disrupt his cash flow for weeks. He studied her over his coffee cup, something like approval in his eyes. "And the casualties? Would be significant," she acknowledged. "But less than if we wait for him to come at us again." Garrett set down his cup and moved behind her chair, leaning over her shoulder to examine the maps she'd marked. His proximity sent warmth cascading down her spine. "You think like your father," he said quietly. "Is that a compliment?" "It's an observation." His hand settled briefly on her shoulder. "The operation team meets in 30 minutes. I want you there." That meeting marked a turning point. No longer just Garrett's bride for show, Ellie became an active participant in the organization's decisions. The Dallas contingent, initially skeptical of taking orders from Cooper Blackwood's daughter, gradually came to respect her insights. She had her father's strategic mind coupled with a boldness he'd always lacked. As April gave way to May, the Wolcott-Blackwood alliance stabilized territories from Dallas to Santa Fe. Redding retreated temporarily, regrouping after their coordinated strikes against his distribution points. But everyone knew it was merely a pause in the conflict, not an end. During these weeks, Ellie found herself drawn more deeply into hacienda life. She learned to ride the powerful horses Garrett bred in his stables. Isabella taught her to make traditional New Mexican dishes in the sprawling kitchen. Even Colt warmed slightly, his initial hostility thawing to grudging respect after she outshot him at the private range behind the property. And Garrett remained an enigma, professional and distant during business hours, then surprisingly attentive during their private dinners, asking about her childhood, her dreams before her father's death had narrowed her path. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Other times, he retreated behind walls she couldn't penetrate. The connecting door between their rooms remained closed, but increasingly, Ellie found herself pausing beside it in the night, wondering. One evening, a rare spring thunderstorm swept over the mountains, bringing violent winds and slashing rain. Ellie stood on her balcony, mesmerized by lightning branching across the black sky. The untamed power of it called to something wild in her own blood. "You shouldn't be out here," Garrett's voice came from behind her. He stood in her doorway, silhouetted against the lamplight. "It's beautiful," she said, turning back to the storm. "It's dangerous." But he moved to join her at the railing, the rain quickly darkening his shirt. "Sometimes dangerous things are beautiful." The words slipped out before she could catch them. Lightning flashed, illuminating his face, the sharp angles softened by rain, his eyes holding hers. For a heartbeat, the storm seemed to pause around them. Then a deafening crack split the air. One of the ancient pine trees along the drive had snapped, its massive trunk falling toward the house. Before Ellie could react, Garrett shoved her aside, shielding her with his body as branches crashed through the balcony railing. Wood splintered, stone cracked, and they tumbled backward into her room, Garrett taking the brunt of the impact. They landed hard, his arms still wrapped protectively around her. For a suspended moment, they lay there, hearts pounding in unison, rain slanting in through the broken doorway. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough. "No." She could feel his heart hammering against her palm. "Are you?" Instead of answering, he brushed rain-soaked hair from her face, his eyes darkening as they traced her features. Something shifted between them, the careful distance evaporating like mist in desert heat. Ellie didn't know who moved first. Only that suddenly his mouth was on hers, hungry and desperate, and she was answering with equal fervor, weeks of tension dissolving into this one point of contact. His hands tangled in her hair, hers gripped his shoulders, and the storm outside paled compared to the one breaking between them. When they finally broke apart, breathing heavily, reality rushed back. Garrett's expression shifted, becoming unreadable again as he helped her to her feet. "I should check the damage," he said, his voice controlled once more. "Garrett." She reached for him. "Not now, Eleanor." He stepped away. "The timing isn't right." But as he moved to the door, his eyes dropped to the silver key hanging exposed at her throat. A flicker of something hope perhaps crossed his face before he disappeared into the hallway. That night, Ellie lay awake, fingers tracing her lips, replaying the moment again and again. The protective instinct in his lunge, the heat in his kiss, the restraint in his retreat. The man was a contradiction wrapped in riddles, and despite every logical argument against it, she was falling for him. Outside, the storm finally broke, leaving behind a sky washed clean of clouds. Stars emerged, bright and cold, witnesses to the realization forming in Ellie's heart. She was no longer pretending. Somewhere between strategy meetings and stolen glances, between danger and desire, this had become real. May melted into June with deceptive peace. The damaged balcony was repaired, the fallen tree cleared away. On the surface, business continued, shipments moved through territories, money flowed, alliances were maintained, but undercurrents of tension rippled through the organization. Redding was too quiet, planning something big. Everyone agreed. Between Ellie and Garrett, a new tension simmered, neither acknowledging what had happened during the storm. They worked together seamlessly during the day, their minds operating in strange harmony, but evenings brought awkward silences, meaningful glances quickly averted. The connecting door remained firmly shut, though Ellie often pressed her palm against it, wondering if he stood on the other side, equally conflicted. The silver box remained unopened on her dresser, a constant reminder of trust still incomplete. On the first Friday in June, Garrett announced he was traveling to Dallas to meet with the remnants of Cooper's inner circle men who still resisted full integration into the Wolcott hierarchy. "I want you with me," he told Ellie over breakfast. "They need to see us united." The word choice wasn't lost on her. United, not merely allied. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow morning. Just us and a small security detail." He hesitated. "Pack the box." Her eyes snapped to his. "Why?" "Because it's time you understood what's inside." He rose from the table, his hand briefly covering hers. "Trust me, Eleanor." That evening, as Ellie packed for Dallas, Isabella burst into her room without knocking. "You need to come now," she said urgently. The surveillance feed from the northern property line, they picked up something. In Garrett's security room, a tense group gathered around monitors displaying night vision footage of the desert beyond the hacienda's borders. Garrett stood stone-faced as the grainy images revealed armed men moving into position among the rocks and scrub. "At least 20, Sullivan Hayes said grimly. "Redding's men, judging by their approach pattern." Garrett's expression hardened. "He knows about Dallas. He's making his move while he thinks we're divided." He turned to his lieutenants. "Activate Security Protocol 3. Get everyone to defensive positions." The hacienda transformed into a fortress with practiced efficiency. Steel shutters slid over windows. Hidden compartments in walls yielded weapons. Children and non-combatants were moved to secure rooms deep within the structure. Garrett pulled Ellie aside as men rushed past with assault rifles. "I need you to go to the safe room with Isabella." "I can help," she protested. "I can shoot. I know you can." His hands gripped her shoulders. "But if anything happens to me, you're next in line. The organization will need leadership." Before she could argue further, gunfire erupted outside, the sharp crack of rifle shots followed by the thunder of automatic weapons. The attack had begun sooner than expected. Garrett shoved a handgun into her palm, his eyes intense on hers. Go, now. He pulled her against him in a brief, fierce kiss, a promise or a goodbye. She couldn't tell which, then pushed her toward Isabella, who waited at the hidden doorway that led to the inner sanctum of the house. Ellie hesitated, torn between standing her ground and following his orders. A decision made moot when the front windows exploded inward, showering the foyer with glass, as smoke grenades tumbled across marble floors. "It's a breach!" Colt shouted over the din. "They're inside." Chaos erupted. Gunfire exchanged at point-blank range, shouts and screams echoing off stone walls. Through swirling smoke, Ellie saw Garrett exchanging fire with shadowy figures, Colt at his back, both moving with lethal precision. Then a second explosion rocked the western wall, and more attackers poured in. "Ellie, come on!" Isabella pulled her toward the escape passage with surprising strength. The last image Ellie had before smoke obscured everything was Garrett surrounded, fighting like a cornered wolf. The passage led through the hacienda's foundations, a narrow concrete tunnel illuminated by emergency lights. Isabella pulled her forward, even as Ellie's instincts screamed to go back. "We can't help by getting captured," Isabella said, reading her thoughts. "Garrett planned for this. Trust him. Trust. Always back to trust." They emerged in a small underground garage where a nondescript sedan waited with its engine running. Isabella pushed Ellie into the driver's seat. "Head east toward the interstate. There's a safe house in Tucumcari. Address is programmed in the GPS. You're not coming?" Ellie asked, panic rising. "I'm going back for the others." Isabella's eyes were fierce with determination. "My brother is still in there." Before Ellie could protest, Isabella slammed the car door and slapped the roof. "Go! Now!" Instinct took over. Ellie gunned the engine, the sedan shooting up the ramp and out into the desert night. In her rearview mirror, the hacienda blazed with gunfire and flames, a fortress under siege. Her husband was somewhere in that inferno, possibly dead already. The thought sent a physical pain through her chest. She drove blindly, following back roads away from the property, mind racing through options. The safe house was the logical choice, but Redding would have people watching major routes, and if the hacienda's security had been breached, other safe locations might be compromised too. As she reached the highway junction, Ellie made a split-second decision. Instead of east toward Tucumcari, she turned north, toward the mountains where Garrett occasionally retreated for hunting. There was a cabin there, small, isolated, known to few. Hours later, as false dawn lightened the eastern sky, Ellie pulled the sedan onto an overgrown track that wound up into pine forests. The cabin sat in a small clearing, its weathered logs almost invisible among the trees. Inside was basic but clean. A main room with fireplace and kitchenette, a small bedroom, a bathroom with generator-powered amenities. Garrett had brought her here once, showing her his rare sanctuary from the business. "If we're ever separated," he'd told her, "this is where I'll look for you first." Now she prayed he would have that chance. Ellie secured the doors and windows, then sank onto the bed, exhaustion and delayed shock hitting her like a physical blow. Only then did she realize she'd fled with nothing but the clothes on her back and the key around her neck. The silver box. She'd left it behind. Tears spilled down her cheeks for the box. For Garrett. For the fragile new life that had been shattered in a single violent night. For the truth she could no longer deny, even to herself. Somewhere amid the danger and complexity, she had fallen in love with her arranged husband. "Please be alive," she whispered into the empty cabin. "Please find me." Outside, the mountain wind whispered through pine needles, carrying the scent of coming rain. Inside, Eleanor Blackwood Wolcott clutched a silver key to her heart and waited for either salvation or ruin. 3 days passed in the mountain cabin, each hour stretching like years. Ellie rationed the sparse supplies, kept the lights off after dark, and jumped at every sound in the surrounding forest. The old radio yielded nothing about attacks in Santa Fe. Either the news was being suppressed, or the media didn't know what had happened behind the hacienda's walls. On the second night, unable to sleep, she found Garrett's hunting jacket hanging in the small closet. She slipped it on, breathing in the faint traces of his cologne, allowing herself the luxury of tears she'd been too numb to shed before. Memories flickered behind her closed eyes, Garrett's rare smile when she bested Colt at target practice, the intensity in his gaze when he listened to her ideas, the gentle way his fingers had traced her face in the rain. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to care. The marriage was business, strategy, survival, nothing more. Yet here she was, heart raw with worry, the taste of his desperate kiss still lingering on her lips. The silver key hung heavy around her neck, a constant reminder of trust incomplete. What lock did it open? What secret was so important that Garrett would make it the centerpiece of their relationship? On the morning of the 4th day, Ellie heard a vehicle approaching, tires crunching on the narrow dirt road, engine rumbling in the stillness. She grabbed the hunting rifle from above the fireplace and positioned herself beside the window, heart hammering against her ribs. A black SUV pulled into the clearing, identical to the ones Garrett's men drove. Hope surged, then faltered as the driver stepped out, a man she'd never seen before, his movements too casual for someone who belonged to the organization. He spoke into a radio, eyes scanning the cabin's perimeter. Redding's man. Had to be. Ellie weighed her options. The cabin had a cellar access beneath the braided rug, a tight space barely large enough for 2 people, used for emergency supplies and, she suspected, occasional contraband. She could hide, hope they didn't search thoroughly, or she could fight one woman against however many were in that SUV. Neither option appealed to the Blackwood in her. The man was joined by a second, both armed, both moving with practiced caution toward the cabin. Decision time. Ellie retreated to the bedroom, yanked open the floorboards where Garrett kept emergency cash and identification, and grabbed both. Then, rifle in hand, she slipped out the back window and into the dense pines behind the cabin. Forest shadows swallowed her as she circled wide, keeping the cabin in sight. The men had reached the front porch now, one covering while the other tried the door. Finding it locked, they exchanged words she couldn't hear. Then the first man stepped back and fired at the lock. The sound echoed through the mountains, sending birds scattering from treetops. Ellie used the distraction to move closer to the SUV. If she could reach it before they finished searching the cabin, she'd have transportation and a chance. 20 yards, 10. The vehicle loomed before her. Driver's door still ajar, keys dangling from the ignition. Too easy. She froze, instincts screaming. A trap? Or simple carelessness? Before she could decide, a third man emerged from the trees to her right, older, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit entirely unsuited for the mountains. He carried no visible weapon, but the confidence in his stance made him more threatening than his armed companions. "Mrs. Wolcott," he called, his voice carrying easily through the clear air. "Please don't run. I only want to talk." Ellie raised the rifle, aiming center mass. "That's close enough." The man stopped, hands raised in placation. "Marshal Redding," he introduced himself with a small bow. "I've been looking forward to meeting Cooper's daughter." "You've been trying to kill me and my husband," Ellie corrected, finger steady on the trigger. Redding's lips curved in what might have been amusement. "If I wanted you dead, Eleanor, you wouldn't have made it to the cabin. What do you want?" "The same thing you do to survive in a changing landscape." He gestured toward the cabin where his men were still searching. "Your husband is dead. The hacienda has fallen. The Wolcott Empire is fractured beyond repair." Each word struck like a physical blow. But Ellie kept her face impassive. Years of watching her father negotiate, showing in her composure. "You're lying." "Am I?" Redding reached into his jacket slowly, telegraphing the movement, and withdrew a small object that caught the morning light. "The silver box." Ellie's heart stuttered. "Garrett Wolcott died protecting this," Redding said, turning the box in his hands. "My men found it clutched in his fist. Must be valuable, whatever's inside." His eyes found the key at her throat. "And I'm betting you know how to open it." Grief threatened to buckle Ellie's knees, but rage steadied her. "If he's dead, why come after me? Why not just force the box open?" Something like respect flickered in Redding's eyes. "Because it's not about the box, Eleanor. It's about what it represents. The alliance. The future." He took a careful step forward. "I'm offering you a choice. Join me. Bring your father's connections, your husband's territories. Together we could control everything from California to Louisiana. And if I refuse," Redding's smile thinned, "then I take it all anyway. And you die on this mountain, another casualty of an unfortunate turf war." Ellie's mind raced, assessing angles, distances, odds. 3 armed men versus 1 woman with a hunting rifle and a broken heart. But something in Redding's eagerness, in the way he held the silver box like a trophy, gave her pause. "Let me see it," she said, nodding toward the box. "Prove it's really Garrett's." A calculated risk, but one that worked. Redding approached, extending the silver box like an offering. As he drew near, Ellie lowered the rifle slightly, a show of consideration, of possible cooperation. Close enough to see the familiar turquoise inlay, the delicate engravings. Close enough to spot what Redding had missed, a smudge of blood on the silver surface that couldn't belong to Garrett. Her husband never bled, not on anything he treasured. "You know what?" Ellie said softly. "I think I'll take that third option." Before Redding could react, the forest erupted with the distinctive crack of high-powered rifles. His men by the cabin dropped where they stood. Redding himself staggered backward, eyes wide with shock as red bloomed across his immaculate suit jacket. From the trees behind Ellie, a familiar voice called out, "Excellent timing, Mrs. Wolcott." Garrett stepped from the shadows, very much alive, a rifle in his hands, and that rare, genuine smile lighting his face. The world narrowed to a single point of focus: Garrett, alive, moving toward her through dappled forest light. Blood stained his shirt beneath a tactical vest. A cut bisected his eyebrow. But his eyes, those pale blue eyes that had haunted her dreams, fixed on her with an intensity that made everything else fade away. Redding lay sprawled in the dirt, clutching his shoulder, his face contorted with pain and fury. Around them, figures emerged from the forest: Colt, Isabella, Sullivan Hayes, and others from the hacienda, all bearing signs of the recent battle but very much alive. "You're not dead," Ellie whispered as Garrett reached her. "Disappointed?" His voice carried a hint of humor, but his eyes searched hers with something like uncertainty. In answer, she dropped the rifle and threw herself against him, hands clutching the solid warmth of him, reassuring herself this wasn't another dream, another desperate hope. His arms encircled her, strong and sure, his face burying in her hair. "I knew you'd come here," he murmured against her temple. "I knew you'd remember." Reality intruded in the form of Colt, who kicked Redding's leg, none too gently. "What do we do with this piece of garbage?" Garrett pulled back, though he kept one arm around Ellie's waist, unwilling to let her go completely. "Secure him. We're taking him back with us." As Colt and the others handled Redding, Garrett turned to Ellie, brushing hair from her face with tender precision. "Are you hurt?" "No, but you are." She touched the edge of his blood-stained shirt. "It's nothing. A graze." His eyes dropped to the silver key at her throat, then to the box Redding had dropped in the dirt. "You never opened it." "I couldn't." She swallowed hard. "It was still in my room when the attack came. I thought it was lost." Garrett stooped to retrieve the box, brushing dirt from its surface. Redding found it during the attack. Thought it contained account numbers, security codes. Summer swept across New Mexico with relentless heat, baking the adobe walls of Hacienda Sangre back to their original reddish hue. The scars of battle faded, bullet holes patched, broken tiles replaced, charred wood removed and renewed. Like the desert itself, the estate proved resilient, determined to survive. The organization's healing proved more complex. In the month following Redding's defeat, Ellie and Garrett worked 18-hour days, traveling between Dallas and Santa Fe, meeting with lieutenants, suppliers, and allies. Merging two criminal empires with decades of separate history required more than declarations and threats. It demanded a delicate balance of force and diplomacy. Jacobson's refusing to adjust the distribution routes through Oklahoma, Colt reported one evening, dropping a file on Garrett's desk. "Says he doesn't take orders from the Blackwood girl." Garrett's expression darkened, but Ellie placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Let me handle Jacobson." The next day, she flew to Oklahoma City alone, against Garrett's protests. She returned 12 hours later with Jacobson's signed agreement, and his eldest son in tow, the boy eager for a position within the new organization that his father had been too proud to request directly. "How did you manage that?" Garrett asked that night, watching her kick off her heels with a satisfied smile. "I reminded him that while he might not want to take orders from the Blackwood girl, he definitely doesn't want to be on the wrong side of the Wolcott bride." Her eyes glinted with quiet triumph. "Then I offered his son the Dallas-Albuquerque corridor management. Family loyalty works both ways." Garrett laughed, a sound still rare enough to turn heads when it echoed through the hacienda corridors. "Remind me never to negotiate against you." Not all transitions went so smoothly. Old rivalries flared in El Paso, resulting in 3 deaths before order was restored. A shipment was hijacked near Amarillo by former Redding loyalists. The FBI, sensing disruption in the underworld hierarchy, intensified surveillance, forcing several operations underground until new protections could be established. Through it all, Ellie and Garrett moved as a unit, their complementary strengths, forging a leadership that inspired both fear and loyalty. His unflinching authority balanced by her strategic diplomacy, his deep knowledge of tradition countered by her willingness to innovate. Where Cooper Blackwood had ruled through intimidation, and Garrett's father through rigid control, they created something different, a network built on mutual interest and carefully cultivated respect. Even Colt grudgingly adapted, his initial resentment of Ellie evolving into something like admiring irritation. "You're turning my brother soft," he accused one morning, finding her adding fresh flowers to Garrett's study. "Am I?" she countered. "Ask the 3 enforcers he dispatched in Lubbock last week if they think he's gone soft." Colt snorted, then hesitated, uncharacteristically awkward. The thing about Jacobson, that was good work. Coming from Colt, it was practically a declaration of devotion. July brought a lull in the chaos, a brief window of relative stability. The hacienda gardens burst into bloom, desert flowers thriving in the carefully tended soil. On the evening of the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, Garrett found Ellie in their shared sanctuary, the small courtyard that had been his mother's favorite place. "I have something for you," he said, sitting beside her on the stone bench. "Not another mysterious box, I hope." Her smile softened the words. "No more mysteries between us." He took her hand, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "When we married, it wasn't real. A business arrangement forced by circumstances neither of us chose." She leaned into him slightly. "It became real." "Yes," he agreed softly, "but not in the right order." From his pocket, he withdrew a ring, not the formal platinum band she'd worn since their wedding, but a simple circle of gold set with a single perfect diamond. "I want to do this properly." Ellie's breath caught as he slid from the bench to one knee before her. "Eleanor Blackwood," he said, voice rough with emotion. "I love you. Not for your name, not for your connections, not for what you bring to my organization. I love you for your mind, your courage, your heart." His fingers closed around hers. "Will you marry me again? This time because we choose each other?" Tears spilled onto her cheeks as she nodded, words momentarily beyond her. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, she pulled him to her in a kiss that held all the answers words couldn't express. 2 weeks later, they renewed their vows beneath the ancient cottonwood tree that had somehow survived the gunfire and chaos. No politicians or business associates this time, only those who had earned their trust through blood and loyalty. Isabella arranged wildflowers in Ellie's hair. Sullivan Hayes spoke ancient words of blessing in a voice thick with rare emotion. Even Colt stood solemn and proud beside his brother. Instead of formal vows, they spoke their own truths. Ellie promised strength and partnership, honesty and fierce devotion. Garrett pledged protection and respect, faithfulness and unwavering support. When he kissed her, the gathered witnesses erupted in cheers that echoed across the desert valley. Later, as twilight deepened and celebration continued around them, Garrett led Ellie to the edge of the property, where the land dropped away into the vastness of the New Mexico wilderness. Stars emerged overhead, brilliant in the clear mountain air. "When I was a boy," he said quietly, "my mother would bring me here on nights like this. She'd point to the stars and tell me that somewhere, someone she loved was looking at the same sky, thinking of her." His arm tightened around Ellie's waist. "I never understood until now." Ellie leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "They would be proud," she whispered, "of what we've built from their broken dream." As darkness enveloped the desert and fires blazed in celebration behind them, Eleanor and Garrett Wolcott stood at the edge of their domain, their shadows merging into one against the endless horizon, no longer forced together by fate, but bound by something far stronger. 5 years transformed Eleanor Blackwood Wolcott from reluctant bride to legendary figure in the criminal hierarchy of the Southwest. Where once she had been viewed as Garrett's political accessory, she was now recognized as the architect of the organization's evolution, the force that had modernized operations, diversified investments, and expanded influence into legitimate enterprises across 3 states. Hacienda Sangre itself reflected this transformation. The defensive walls remained, but within them, beauty flourished. The gallery in Santa Fe became the cornerstone of a small empire of legal businesses, restaurants, luxury hotels, tech startups. Money flowed through increasingly sophisticated channels, clean by the time it reached the surface. "The Commodities Commission is asking questions about the Texas holdings," Sullivan Hayes reported during their weekly council. Age had finally caught up with him, silver hair thinning, movement slower, but his mind remained razor-sharp. "Let them ask," Ellie replied, reviewing figures on her tablet. "Every transaction is documented, every investment legitimate. The shell companies are 3 layers deep." Garrett watched her from the head of the table, pride evident in his gaze. In the years since their second wedding, their partnership had evolved into something rare in their world, a true balance of power, each strengthening the other. "The Phoenix situation needs attention," Colt interjected, his former wildness channeled into becoming their most effective enforcer. "Hernandez is pushing boundaries again." "I'll handle Hernandez," Garrett said. Set up a meeting for next week. The atmosphere in the room shifted slightly, everyone present aware that handling potentially meant blood. Despite the organization's increasing sophistication, some matters still required the old ways. After the meeting dispersed, Ellie found Garrett in his study, examining a map of Arizona territories. His face had hardened over the years, new lines etched by responsibility and power, yet he remained devastatingly handsome. At 39, he carried authority like a second skin. You're worried about Phoenix, she said, closing the door behind her. Hernandez has gotten ambitious since his father's retirement. Garrett turned to face her. He's young, eager to prove himself. Dangerous combination. Like we were? A smile played at her lips. He crossed to her, hands settling at her waist. We were never young. The truth in his words hung between them both, shaped by loss and duty from their earliest days, which was perhaps why they guarded their hard-won happiness so fiercely. That evening, they hosted a charity gala at the hacienda, one of the carefully orchestrated public events that cemented their reputation as philanthropists and community leaders. The governor attended, along with senators and business magnates, none acknowledging that much of their campaign funding originated in the very rooms where they now sipped champagne and pledged donations to children's hospitals. Isabella, now head of their legitimate art enterprises, guided important guests through a display of Native American sculptures, her expertise and charm disarming even the most suspicious. Colt charmed investors' wives, gathering gossip and weaknesses with practiced ease. The organization functioned like a perfect machine, each member playing their role. Yet beneath the glittering surface, trouble brewed. Halfway through the evening, Garrett received a text that pulled him from conversation with a judge. Ellie, attuned to his moods after years together, recognized the subtle shift in his posture. Excusing herself from the agriculture secretary's monologue, she followed him to his private office. What is it? She asked as he closed the door. Hernandez moved early. Garrett's voice was cold with controlled fury. His people hit our warehouse in Tucson an hour ago. 3 of our people dead. Ellie's mind raced, calculating implications, options, responses. He's testing us, seeing if prosperity has made us soft. He'll have his answer by morning. Garrett reached for his phone. Wait. She covered his hand with hers. Not like this. Not reactive. He killed our people, Eleanor. I know. Her voice softened with shared grief and rage. But this isn't 5 years ago. We have more to protect now. More to lose. She was right. And he knew it. Their organization had grown too large, too interconnected with legitimate power structures to risk all-out war. The governor currently admiring their art collection wouldn't appreciate cartels shooting each other across his state. What do you suggest? He asked, trusting her strategic mind as he always had. We send a message he'll understand, but nothing that triggers full escalation. Her eyes glinted with cold purpose. We remind him who we are without becoming what he expects. By midnight, the guests had departed, praising the Wolcott's generosity and impeccable taste. By 2 a.m., a carefully selected team had infiltrated Hernandez's compound outside Phoenix, bypassing security with inside information only Ellie could have procured. They took nothing, harmed no one, but left behind a silver box on Hernandez's pillow inside. Photographs of his sleeping children, his mistress, his elderly mother, a message clearer than bullets. We can reach what you love most. Anytime we choose. When dawn broke, Hernandez called, voice shaking with fury and fear, ready to negotiate. A masterstroke, Garrett told Ellie afterward, pulling her into his embrace. Bloodless but devastating. Not entirely bloodless, she reminded him, grief for their lost people evident in her voice. But contained. This was their way now, calculated force rather than blind violence, strategic pressure instead of open warfare. The organization had evolved, as had they. On a crisp October morning, 5 years and 3 months after Ellie had first arrived at Hacienda Sangre, she stood on the terrace watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. Garrett joined her, coffee mugs in hand, his silent presence a comfort as always. I have something for you, she said after a comfortable silence. He raised an eyebrow, accepting the small package she withdrew from her pocket. Inside lay a pendant, a silver bird in flight, crafted with intricate detail. What's this for? He asked, voice softening as he examined it. When we married, you gave me a box that held the truth of our past. She took the pendant and fastened it around his neck, her fingers lingering against his skin. This is a reminder of our future, the freedom we've built together. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Eleanor, I'm pregnant, she confirmed, voice steady despite the emotion beneath. 3 months now. Joy transformed his features, raw, unguarded joy that few besides her ever witnessed. His hands cradled her face with reverent tenderness. A child, he whispered, the word holding all his wonder and fear. Our legacy, she agreed. Something more lasting than territory or power. The implications hung between them, a child born into their world, both blessed and burdened by the empire they'd built. A child who would need protection from enemies and from the darkness inherent in their business. We'll keep them safe, Garrett vowed, one hand moving to rest protectively over her still flat stomach. Better than our parents could. We'll give them choices, Ellie added. Real ones, not illusions. As the sun climbed higher, painting the desert in light, they remained entwined on the terrace, planning for a future neither had dared imagine when a young woman from Dallas had first stepped reluctantly into this world. The silver bird glinted at Garrett's throat, its wings caught in eternal flight like them, transformed by unexpected love from captives of fate to architects of their own destiny. That evening, as stars emerged over the New Mexico sky, Ellie stood in the nursery they'd begun preparing, her hand resting on the small silver box that now sat on a shelf. Inside, the photograph of Cooper Blackwood and Garrett's mother smiled eternally, their love finally bearing fruit in the child who would carry both their bloodlines. From this day forward, she whispered to the empty room, the words a promise and a prayer. We make our own fate. Beyond the hacienda walls, the desert wind carried her words across the ancient landscape, weaving them into the very stones of the empire she and Garrett had forged, not from duty or survival, but from the most unexpected and powerful force of all. Spring brought new life to the desert, wildflowers erupting in unexpected places, jackrabbits darting among cacti, and hawks circling the cloudless sky. Within Hacienda Sangre's walls, life took new form as Eleanor's pregnancy advanced, her body changing with the passing months. By April, she had traded fitted business attire for flowing dresses that accommodated her growing belly, though her commanding presence remained undiminished. The Juarez shipment cleared customs without incident, she informed Garrett, reviewing reports in his study, one hand absently stroking her stomach where their child rolled and kicked. And the Dallas nightclub acquisition is proceeding on schedule. Garrett watched her with an expression few others ever witnessed, tender, almost vulnerable. You should be resting, he said, not for the first time that week. I'm pregnant, not incapacitated. Her response came automatically, a familiar exchange between them, but her smile softened the words as she moved to the window, gazing at the mountains beyond. Besides, there's too much happening. The transition needs to be seamless before the baby comes. The transition their carefully orchestrated shift toward more legitimate enterprises, reducing their direct involvement in the riskier aspects of their business. Not an exit from the underworld, but an evolution designed to protect what mattered most. Their growing family. Have you decided on godparents yet? Garrett asked, joining her at the window, his hand settling protectively at the small of her back. Isabella, obviously, Ellie replied. As for godfather, she glanced up at him with a hint of mischief. I'm still considering whether your brother can be trusted not to teach our child how to hotwire cars before kindergarten. Garrett chuckled, the sound still rare enough to treasure. Colt's surprisingly excited about becoming an uncle. He's been researching baby monitors with military-grade encryption. The changes in those around them had been unexpected but heartwarming. Colt had traded his most reckless behaviors for focused intensity as head of security. Isabella had begun quietly dating a respected gallery owner from Santa Fe, bringing him to family dinners where he sat terrified but determined beside the woman he loved. Even Sullivan Hayes had found new purpose in preparing historical records of the organization for the next generation. We should finalize the trust documents this week, Ellie said, business never far from her mind, despite the domestic moment. The Cayman accounts, the property transfers, everything needs to be in order. Garrett's arms encircled her from behind, his chin resting atop her head. It will be. Our child will want for nothing. Except normal parents, she murmured, voicing the fear that occasionally surfaced as her due date approached. Parents whose business meetings don't include discussions of territory enforcement and money laundering. Is that what you want? Garrett asked carefully. Normal. Ellie turned in his arms, studying the face she'd come to love in all its complexity, the hardness that could frighten cartel leaders softening only for her. I want our child to have choices, she said. Real ones. Not forced paths like we had. He nodded, understanding the deeper meaning beneath her words. Their empires had been built on blood and obligation, Their child deserved something better. The following week brought unexpected complications. During a routine check of their financial networks, Isabella discovered irregularities in the Chicago account's small discrepancies that suggested someone was skimming, or worse, building evidence against them. Internal or external? Garrett demanded when the senior team gathered in the secure conference room. Unclear, Colt replied, frustration evident in his tense shoulders. But the pattern suggests someone with mid-level access. Not top leadership, but not a grunt either. Ellie, 7 months pregnant and increasingly uncomfortable, studied the financial reports projected on the screen. The timing correlates with our legitimate expansion announcements, she observed. Someone's nervous about the organization's direction, or capitalizing on perceived weakness, Sullivan Hayes added, his papery hands spreading across the polished table. There are still those who view your focus on legitimacy as softness. The implication hung in the air. Their shift toward cleaner operations, their preparation for parenthood, might be interpreted as vulnerability by ambitious underlings or rivals. Find them. Garrett's voice cut through the tension, cold and precise. Quietly. In the days that followed, Colt's security team conducted silent investigations. Isabella reviewed financial records for patterns, and Hayes activated old contacts throughout the Southwest. Ellie, meanwhile, focused on presenting an image of unshakable control, attending meetings and public functions despite Garrett's concerns about her health. They need to see me, she insisted after a particularly grueling charity luncheon with political donors. Especially now. Any hint of retreat will be perceived as weakness. Garrett knew she was right, though it didn't ease his worry. The vulnerability he felt regarding Eleanor and their unborn child was new territory for a man who had spent decades building walls against exactly such attachments. On a stormy night in late April, as lightning split the desert sky and rain hammered against adobe walls, the betrayal finally revealed itself. A junior accountant from the Dallas operation, nephew to one of Cooper Blackwood's old lieutenants, had been systematically documenting transactions and communications for the FBI. Agent Williams, still pursuing her vendetta years later, had found her mole at last. He's scheduled to testify next Tuesday, Colt reported grimly, rain dripping from his jacket as he stood in Garrett's study. Grand jury, federal courthouse in Dallas. Garrett's face remained impassive, but Ellie, seated nearby, caught the slight tightening of his jaw, the only outward sign of his cold fury. Options? He asked. The traditional approach would be elimination, Hayes said matter-of-factly. But that's problematic, given current scrutiny, and it doesn't address what evidence has already been collected. We need containment, not bloodshed, Ellie interjected, shifting uncomfortably as the baby kicked forcefully against her ribs. Discredit him, invalidate his testimony. How? Colt demanded. The feds have been building this case for months, a plan formed in Ellie's mind ruthless, precise, and bloodless. The kind of strategy that had become their hallmark. His weakness isn't physical, it's psychological, she said, remembering details from personnel files she'd reviewed. His gambling debts, his desperation to prove himself to his uncle. We use that. By morning, they had constructed an elegant trap, financial records suggesting the accountant himself had been embezzling, backdated evidence of gambling debts to cartel-connected casinos, and communications with known criminals that Hayes's technical team planted with surgical precision. By the time we're done, Ellie concluded, his credibility will be destroyed, and Agent Williams will have wasted years on a case that collapses in court. Garrett watched her with undisguised admiration. You're remarkable, you know that? She smiled tiredly, dark circles beneath her eyes testifying to the sleepless night. I had good teachers, my father, you. Her hand found his across the table. And strong motivation. She looked down at her rounded belly. Some threats require bullets. This one requires brains. As the storm cleared and dawn broke over the mountains, Ellie stood at their bedroom window, watching desert creatures emerge to drink from rain puddles. The world washed clean, if only temporarily. Behind her, Garrett slept a rare sight, this unguarded version of the man so many feared. Her hand cradled her stomach protectively, feeling the gentle movements of their child. We're creating something new, she whispered, a promise to the life growing within her. A different kind of power, a different kind of freedom. The silver pendant Garrett always wore her gift to him caught the morning light on the bedside table, its wings seeming to pulse with possibility. Like them, transformed by choices neither had expected to make. The baby arrived in early June, a daughter with Garrett's pale blue eyes and Ellie's dark hair, tiny fingers gripping her parents' world and reshaping it entirely. They named her Aurora, after the dawn that breaks even the darkest night. She's perfect, Garrett whispered, holding his daughter with surprising gentleness, wonder softening his features. The man who could order executions with a nod cradled this 7-pound miracle, as though she might shatter at his touch. She's ours, Ellie replied simply, exhausted from 18 hours of labor, but radiating a fierce protective joy. The hacienda transformed overnight, security doubling while the internal atmosphere softened. Colt installed a state-of-the-art monitoring system in the nursery, then spent hours crafting a mobile of silver stars to hang above Aurora's crib. Isabella painted woodland creatures on the nursery walls, creatures that seemed to dance in the New Mexico sunlight. Even Sullivan Hayes, approaching 80 now, would sit in a rocking chair telling ancient stories to an infant too young to understand the words but soothed by his gravelly voice. The business continued. Of course, the Wolcott Blackwood organization had grown too vast, too intricate to pause for something as ordinary as birth. But priorities shifted. Decisions filtered through the lens of legacy rather than merely profit or power. The Hernandez situation has stabilized, Garrett reported one evening, joining Ellie in the nursery where she sat nursing Aurora. He's accepted the new territorial boundaries in exchange for distribution rights through Nogales. Ellie nodded, her attention divided between business and the hungry infant at her breast. And the federal investigation? Collapsed last month, just as you predicted. Williams has been reassigned to white-collar crime in Minnesota. A smile of satisfaction crossed his face. The accountant won't be troubling anyone again. She raised an eyebrow. Nothing so permanent, he assured her. Just ensured he found employment far away with people who will keep him occupied. Kazakhstan has lovely weather this time of year. This was their new balance, maintaining control of their empire while steering it toward shores where their daughter might someday stand in sunlight, unburdened by the shadows that had defined her parents' beginnings. Aurora's first birthday celebration brought together the organization's leadership from across the Southwest, a gathering that doubled as a strategic summit and family reunion. As twilight descended on the hacienda gardens, lanterns illuminated tables laden with food and drink. Music drifted through the warm evening air, a blend of traditional Southwest melodies and modern rhythms. Ellie, elegant in a midnight blue dress, moved among their guests with practiced grace, no trace remaining of the reluctant bride who had arrived 6 years earlier. She caught sight of Garrett across the courtyard, their daughter perched on his shoulders, her tiny hands tangled in his dark hair. Something tightened in Ellie's chest at the sight love so fierce it bordered on pain. "You've built something remarkable here," a voice observed beside her. Isabella, stunning in crimson, champagne flute in hand. "Not just the business. This family," Ellie smiled, watching as Colt approached his brother, reaching up to tickle Aurora until she giggled with delight. "Not what either of us expected when we were forced together. The best things rarely come as expected." Isabella nodded toward where her gallery owner fiancé chatted amiably with Sullivan Hayes. "We adapt. We find new paths." As the evening deepened, Garrett found Ellie near the old stone fountain at the garden's edge. Aurora had finally succumbed to sleep in Isabella's arms, allowing her parents a rare moment alone. "Happy?" he asked quietly, handing her a glass of wine. "Content," she corrected, leaning into him slightly. "There's a difference." He understood, as he always did. Happiness was fleeting, a momentary pleasure. Contentment was deeper, the satisfaction of purpose fulfilled, challenges overcome, future secured. Neither of them had been raised to expect happiness, but they had built contentment together, brick by brick. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. An anniversary gift, of sorts. In his palm lay a small object, a silver key, identical to the one she had worn during those uncertain early days of their marriage. The key to the box that had changed everything. "What does it open?" she asked, taking it carefully. His smile held secrets and promises. The future, when the time comes. The cryptic answer might once have frustrated her. Now it simply intrigued her. Another layer to the complex man she'd chosen to love. She slipped the key onto the chain around her neck, letting it rest beside the platinum wedding band she never removed. "Dance with me," he murmured, leading her toward where couples moved beneath strung lights. 6 years since their first dance as reluctant partners, when she had trembled in his arms and he had hidden behind walls of duty. Now they moved together with the synchronicity of souls who had learned each other's rhythms through fire and tenderness alike. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, echoing a question from long ago. "The letter your father intercepted, the arrangement that brought us together." His hand tightened at her waist. Not for a moment. He studied her face in the gentle light. "And you?" Do you regret opening the box when you did? I regret not opening it sooner, she admitted. Not trusting sooner. As midnight approached, guests began departing, leaving family to gather around the central fire pit. Aurora slept peacefully in a nearby bassinet, Colt standing guard with uncharacteristic solemnity. Isabella and her fiancé whispered together on a stone bench. Sullivan Hayes dozed in his favorite chair, age finally catching up with even his indomitable spirit. Garrett raised his glass. To family, he said simply. Chosen and created. The words held layers of meaning understood by all present, acknowledgement of the bonds they had formed beyond blood or obligation. A family forged in the crucible of shared purpose and mutual protection. Later that night, with their daughter sleeping soundly and the hacienda quiet around them, Ellie and Garrett stood on their bedroom balcony beneath a canopy of desert stars. The silver key hung between them, catching moonlight as she leaned against his chest. I've been thinking, she said, her voice soft but determined, about Aurora's future, about what we want for her. She'll have everything, he promised. Power, protection, opportunity. But will she have freedom? Ellie turned to face him fully. Real freedom, not the illusion of choice within predetermined boundaries. Understanding dawned in his eyes. This conversation had been building for months, perhaps since the moment they'd known they were to become parents. The question that haunted them both. Could a child raised in their world ever truly choose her own path? What are you suggesting? He asked carefully. A contingency plan, she replied. A way out for her, if she ever wants it. A life completely separate from all this. She gestured toward the empire that stretched beyond their walls. Clean money, clean identity, clean start. It was a radical proposition, preparing an escape route from the very power structure they had dedicated their lives to building. Yet in Garrett's eyes, she saw not resistance but thoughtful consideration. The ultimate gift, he said finally. The choice neither of us truly had. That's what the key opens, she realized suddenly. Isn't it? His smile confirmed her intuition. A trust I established on her birthday, completely separate from our other holdings. Untraceable, unreachable by enemies or allies. Enough for her to disappear and build whatever life she chooses, if that's what she wants. Tears pricked Ellie's eyes, not of sadness but of profound recognition. Without discussing it, they had arrived at the same conclusion. The same protective instinct for their daughter's future autonomy. Great minds, she whispered, rising on tiptoes to kiss him softly. Great hearts, he corrected against her lips. 10 years after Eleanor Blackwood first stepped reluctantly from a car onto the hacienda's dusty drive, she stood in the doorway of her daughter's bedroom, watching Aurora sleep beneath the mobile of silver stars. At 9, she was already showing hints of the woman she would become: her father's strategic mind, her mother's diplomatic instincts, and a fierce independence that belonged entirely to herself. The silver box that had once contained secrets now sat on Aurora's bookshelf, repurposed to hold treasures only a child would value: interesting rocks, feathers, a pressed wildflower. The mystery that had once defined Ellie and Garrett's beginning had transformed into an ordinary object, its power spent but its symbolism enduring. In the hallway, Garrett waited, silver at his temples now, but no less commanding. She's asleep? Ellie nodded, quietly closing the door. Finally, she wanted 3 bedtime stories tonight. She's negotiating already, he observed with paternal pride, testing boundaries. Wonder where she gets that from. Ellie's smile held the wisdom of years, of challenges overcome, of love tested and proven resilient. Together they walked to their favorite terrace overlooking the desert valley. The organization had evolved beyond recognition in the decades since their forced marriage. Legitimate businesses now outnumbering illicit operations, political influence extending to Washington and beyond. Old enemies, now allies or forgotten entirely. Yet as they stood beneath the vast New Mexico sky, what mattered most was not the empire they'd built but the life they'd created together. Not the power they wielded but the love they'd discovered. Not the past that had forced them together but the future they chose to share. Do you remember what you said to me that first night? Garrett asked, his arm warm around her waist. When I told you the marriage was about alliance, not ownership, I asked why the ceremony, why all the ritual. She recalled, leaning into his familiar strength. And I said, appearances matter in our world. Ellie turned to face him, her hands framing the face she knew better than her own. They still do, she agreed. But reality matters more. Above them, stars scattered across the desert sky like silver promises. Below, their daughter slept safe in the home they had defended through blood and betrayal and love. And between them, A truth neither had expected when fate first threw them together, that sometimes, from the darkest beginnings come the brightest dawns. As midnight approached, Eleanor Blackwood Wolcott stood beside the man she had been forced to marry and had chosen to love, her fingers touching the silver key that symbolized not captivity but liberation. Whatever came next, whatever challenges, whatever triumphs, whatever legacies they would build or break, they would face it as they had faced everything since that stormy night when pretense had given way to truth. Together,